It's The Franklin Show, live from Franklin with America's favorite adopted pup, Franklin Delano Roosevelt Lloyd Wright Sinatra Seltzer, and his friend and favorite Franklin dog adopter, Michael Seltzer. I'm your announcer, Joe Donovan, and I've been doing news in Detroit since Seltzer was biking with Training Wheel. And now, here's Franklin.
Hey, thank you to my great band and to you out there in the audience and up in the balcony. God bless you guys for coming. What a great audience we have tonight. And here we go again with another one of the Franklin shows that means a lot to me. May not mean as much to you, but it's a tribute to radio in Detroit in the 60s when I grew up. We've done a series of these, very popular, very well received, and this one in particular is going to cover many states because it's all about the Big Eight, CKLW, which was the Windsor-Detroit powerhouse. And we have an amazing cast of great DJs and newscasters that were on that famous radio station. You remember 2020 News. You're going to meet some of those 2020 newscasters and some of the biggest DJs ever to come out of Detroit radio. It's our tribute to CKLW, and it's coming up next.
You're not gonna get it all right. Just make sure you nail the big stuff.
Mama!
Like making sure your kids are in the right seat for their age and size. Get it right at nhtsa.gov/the right seat.
We are back. And I am so delighted and so excited because I have been loving these people for decades, along with a lot of other radio phenomenal talents. But I am in particular awe of this group of individuals that we're going to be chatting with today. Franklin and I would like to welcome some of the major influences on Detroit radio from the 1960s and the great powerhouse Windsor, Detroit, CKLW, the Big Eight. Ladies and gentlemen, here's Big Jim Davis. Well, he was known as Jim Edwards back in the day, but his real name is Jim Davis. But Big Jim, I want to welcome you to the Franklin Show.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, the Jim Edwards Show.
CKLW, the Motor City.
Hey, thanks, Michael. First of all, the name was kind of a funny story. There was another Jim Davis who was on at WXYZ at the time. And so they told me that I would have to make up another name because the guy that was on WXYZ, he was James R. Davis, and I was James K. Davis. But they said, well, you have to make up a name that fits in the Drake style. And the Drake style, if you think about it, was one-syllable first names and two-syllable last names. So it was Scott Regen, Tom Shannon, Frank Brody. One-syllable first names, two. So I became Jim Edwards.
Wow.
Sorry.
And that's why I wanted you on first, because you have all the stories. So let's talk about you. You're legendary. You came, you were on the Big Eight. You had a massive career after that, going on becoming an owner-operator, a general manager. I mean, you've done it all, and you've got great stories. So let's start out at the beginning. Let's talk about when you came to CKLW. Where did you come from? And let's talk about that for a bit.
Well, my resume, Michael, says tight board, no drifter. But the reality is I drifted through 27 radio stations in the career. In those days, remember, we moved a lot because if you found a position at a better station in a bigger market for more money, chances are you made that leap. And I had a goal. I wanted to get to New York City as a DJ, and I knew in order to do that, I was going to have to move. But the story begins in Toledo, Ohio. I was working little radio stories of power. None of them worked, I think, because we had 6 daytime towers in Michigan that faced south. We had 6 south towers that faced north, and frankly, it was owned by the Cudahy Meat Packing Company. Never go to work for a radio station owned by a meat packer. And anyway, somewhere along the way, the wife of the meatpacking president said, "I'd really like to hear more Frank Sinatra music on your top 40 radio station." So they flipped the format, and in early 1967, I said, "This is not going to work for me. I'm a rock and roll DJ," and so Ed Bush, who had been fired by Paul Drew as Paul was making the changes to change Radio 8 to the Big 8, Ed said to me, "Jim, you ought to send a tape up to this Paul Drew guy." So I did. I faked a tape in the production room. I sent it up to Paul, and I was learning to fly at the time. And my wife called me in the field base operator. He called me. The radio on the airplane crackled. I was flying at the time, and he said, "Jim, you got to land immediately because your wife says this is an urgent thing. You need to get down." So I landed the airplane. These are long before the days of cell phones, and I called my wife, and my wife said, "Jim, you're never going to believe what happened." She said, I answered the phone, and this fellow said, "Hi, I'm Paul Drew calling," and she said, "Yeah, I'm the Easter Bunny," and she hung up on him. I was off to a really good start. Anyway, Paul's secretary Pat called back and said, "It really is Mr. Drew, and he would like to talk to Jim." So Paul said to me, "Jim," he said, the situation is, I don't like your tape." He said, "You sound phony." And I said, "It was phony, Paul. I made it up in the production room. We flipped our format to easy listening, and I don't know how to do easy listening, so I faked the tape in the production room." He said, "When are you on the air next?" I said, "This afternoon." He said, "Do me a favor, roll the tape, Frank Sinatra and all. Send it up by the Greyhound bus. I'll get it." And he picked it up on Sunday night and called me back Sunday night. He said, "I like your tape a little bit more. Do me a favor, be in my office tomorrow morning at 8:30. I ran out. I got a shirt and a tie. I went to the radio station very early on Monday morning. I left my house in Toledo, and I think 5:30 in the morning, I was sitting in the lobby at CKLW long before they opened. First person I met, by the way, was Rosalie Trombley, the legendary Rosalie Trombley. She came in at 8 o'clock on the switchboard. And then at 8:30, Mr. Drew's secretary, Pat, came out and said, "I'm sorry, Mr. Drew's very busy this morning. It'll be a while till he gets to you." And anyway, he came out like a firestorm about 9:30 or quarter to 10. Said, "Come with me. We're heading off to Motown. I have a Motown exclusive we have to pick up." And we hopped into his old Pontiac, and it had a mobile telephone, which were very unusual in those days and very expensive. We hopped into his car. We went across through customs. We went to the back door of the studio on East Grand Boulevard. The door opened, the door closed, a brown envelope came out. I thought I'd just seen a drug deal, but the reality was he had the brand new acetate of the Supremes exclusive, and he said, What just happened you have not seen?" He said, you're to tell no one what you just saw." And I said, "Okay." He said, "I'm only sharing this with you because I assume that you're coming to work for us." Well, Michael, I honest to God, I couldn't believe the words I just heard was that he said, "You were coming to work for the Big 8. So he said, I want you to give your 2 weeks notice, but on the weekends, I want you to pull a midnight to 6 show on CKLW. I'll be with you." And sure enough, in those days, Paul actually sat with you in the control room for the entire 6 hours of the show with an earphone in his ear, listening to you. I made my first mistake on CKLW at 7 minutes after midnight. I forgot to say the call letters. And he looked over at me very sternly and said, "You have forgotten to say the call letters. You have lost us valuable listeners." He said, "I want you to instruct your operator to turn the record off, put the previous record on, and then come back and this time see if you can remember to say the call letters and never do that again." And Michael, I thought for sure my career had come to a screeching halt. We said very few words through the rest of the 6 hours. I thought that I was done. And then at 6 o'clock, I walked out of the studio. Paul was bundled up in his winter coat. And he said to me, "That was the best first effort I've ever heard. I'll see you tomorrow night." And I thought, wow. So,
and that's from the
there
Easter
Bunny. Paul was a very stern leader, Michael. He was a man who I have tremendous respect for. He taught me, he made my career, honestly. A lot will say different things about Paul. I watched him terminate 42 people during my 3.5 years at CK. Most of them were operators. They were, in Canada, we referred to them as TT ops, which stood for turntable operators. And he was very serious about the fact that he wanted a flawless execution. And for the most part, that's what he got, because these folks really, they realized the options were slim. If you didn't do it right, you were out the door. So there was the beginning, my friend.
That was a great story. And, we've all heard, those of us in the business have all heard legendary stories about Paul Drew, and some good, some bad. But he did have an awful lot of influence. And as you mentioned, Rosalie Trombley, this program is dedicated in the memory of many of those that we've lost. I would put her right up at the top of that list. The song about Rosalie by Bob Seger is legendary. She had the power, she had the tower. That's what that was all about, for those who don't know. And but Jim, you were instrumental in setting CKLW on a course that is legendary and unforgettable. And I thank you for knowing you for all these years, your friendship, you and Patty. You've come to all of our radio reunions. You've been to my home, and I cherish our friendship, and I cherish you. You've been
Thank you,
an icon in this business. So
thank you.
So hang in there. There's more we're going to talk about, but I want to roll over to my friend Pat Holliday, who is sitting in an automobile. This is not the first time we've done an interview with someone in a car. We actually, when I'm in Detroit, I'm in a studio, and I had a guest scheduled, and she went to the wrong location. And I said, well, there's no time for you to get to the studio, so just go on your cell phone. And she's sitting in her car, and it was wonderful. So thank you, Pat, and Vivi, your beautiful wife, right there alongside of you. So welcome, and let's talk about you. When did you arrive to the Big 8?
Yeah, I got there in 1970. Hopefully, I don't lose you guys, because we're right in the middle of West Virginia in the mountains, so it might come in and out. I got there in 1970, and I was hired by Frank Brody, who was a temporary PD for a while, but then he gave it up because he didn't want to be the PD. He didn't like being, the boss of people and maybe having to fire somebody. But anyway, I was in Hartford at WPOP, and Danny Clayton was the PD there, who is actually Ken Wolt. So, big radio guy, went on and, in LA and a bunch of other things. Probably a lot of people know him by his real name, Ken Wolt. Anyway, so I'm in Hartford, and I had known about CK. I had listened to CKLW a million times, loved the radio station. It boomed into Hartford like it was a local at night. It was as loud as our own station there at POP. Anyway, so, I mailed the usual air check. Frank called me back, and I had only been in Hartford like 2 weeks. I had just taken a job from Albany and went there, and then Frank calls and, hey, like to hire you. So I gave notice, and I went up to Detroit. When I got there, I walk into CK, and Frank is not the PD anymore. Alden Deal is the new PD. It's his first day and my first day there, and I'm thinking, oh my God, this is going to be brutal. Who are you? And I go, I'm the new PD. Who are you? I'm the new jock. And I said, this is not going to go well. But I got along great with Alden. He was an awesome guy and a really nice guy, an amazing promotional mind. And, and everything sort of went from there. You were mentioning Rosalie, really kind of an interesting story. And it's funny how life can take you down different paths. On my first day there, full day, so I'm not have been on the air yet. The lunchroom with vending machines was right where the music library was in the old building on Riverside Drive. So I went in and got a candy bar, and I'm trying to, see the place. And, I'm totally new. I walked into her office. She started screaming at me and yelling, "Who are you? What's your name? What are you doing here? Get out of my office." I said, "Well, I'm the new jock. I don't care. Get out. Get out. We're doing music. It's music day." It was Tuesday, where she's calling all of the record stores. And I'm thinking, oh my God, this is brutal. anyway, I just kept going back, coming back, became friends, ultimately started babysitting the kids, and that put me into some other tier. And long story short, although a lot of stories in between, 50 years later, in a really small ceremony, I was asked to do the eulogy for Rosie at her funeral.
Wow.
So to go from being thrown out of the office to, can you do the eulogy? I mean, I would have never thought that in a million years back at that moment. She was a extremely special lady.
Well,
Yeah.
you were also obviously a very good babysitter too. So that's
yes. It's funny when I went to I got offered a job at ORFM in New York, where Big Jim was, and also Walt Baby Love, who I replaced on CKLW when Walt went to ORFM in New York. When I went to New York City, I got there in about maybe a letter from Rosalie, about 10 at the time, asking me to come back to Detroit because he missed me so much, and and the kids did. So it's like, anyway, eventually I did. Two years later, I went back because I didn't like the city and where the station was going in New York. But anyway, that's my story.
So how many years were you at CK?
I was there from 1970 to 94, 95, and I left for 2 years to go to New York. So, that was my time there. In 84, 85 is when they sold the radio station, and they wanted, they made it big band. I'm not staying for that. And Ed Christian called, and Steve Goldstein, and they called, hey, you want to come to WNIC? And I said, well, yeah, sure. Do midday, because I was sick of being a PD at that time. It's funny, at the time, and this is a weird story, but at the time, Gary Berkowitz actually called at the exact same. He called a few days earlier, actually, and he asked if I wanted to do weekends. And I thought, yeah, sure. I have no ego for stuff like that. So I started doing weekends, and sorry, I'm kind of out of order. I started doing weekends there, and then the NIC job came up. No, I'm sorry. Different times. I had the NIC job first. Then that got sold. That station got sold. Then Berkowitz called, want to do weekends. So I'm doing weekends at WHYT. And then WLTI calls and wanted me to be the morning guy in the PD there. And neither one of them had any trouble with me being on both stations at once, because they said, well, yeah, this is a problem. So I did that for another year. I was doing weekends at WHYT, never said my name on the air ever. And I'm doing mornings in the PD at WLTI at the exact same time. And
now,
totally different formats.
Now, of course, radio announcers are doing multiple shows on multiple stations, but they're all owned by Cumulus or iHeart. Yeah. But back in that day, that was incredible that they would allow you to be on two different competing
Very
stations.
Weird. Yeah, especially in the same market. Yeah, it's very strange.
All right, well, you're traveling, and I'm going to let you go for the moment. And thank you, Pat Holiday, for joining us on the Franklin Show.
Yeah,
I'm going to move on to our friend Scotty Regen, who is also a legend in Detroit. Scott was my favorite story about Scott Regen was when he skateboarded into Detroit to be on WKNR Keener 13 and started the Burger Club, Scotty Burger, and then ended up over at CKLW. So, Scott, welcome. His real name,
Thank you, Michael.
But Scotty.
Scott Regen, CKLW.
Thank you for being here. Let's talk about you and when you got the gig at CKLW. Tell us about that.
I was at Keener, and that was at the ascent of CKLW when Drake took it over, and they fired me at Keener. And so I called Paul, and I said, would you like me to come and work there? So he said yes. And then I did 9 to midnight. And I did that for some time. I don't recall exactly how long that was. And then he moved me into the afternoon drive slot.
And you were on CKLW for how long? Do you remember?
Probably about 2 years, 2.5 years.
Yeah, but those were the 2 best years of your life, I'll bet, huh?
Yeah. Well, I would have to say, radio-wise, the best years of my radio life were, in a way, all the years I was in radio. But if you had to pinpoint it, the best years were at Keener, at WKNR.
Yeah.
Doing this.
You were a major force in Detroit radio. The way they promoted you, the way you took Detroit by storm, and of course Keener's ascension was just an amazing thing. It went from 0 to 100 in a minute. You know,
yeah.
Back 1964 or 5, I can't remember.
Yeah. I think, 63, 64, 65. Yeah.
But I didn't know that they fired you. What the hell? Did you fall off your skateboard, or what was the deal there?
Well,
who was the PD?
The person that fired me, I'm debating on whether I want to tell this story.
All right, then don't.
No, it's fine. It's been a long time, and the person that fired me, I got off the air one night at 10, and he said, "I'm sorry, we have to fire you. We need someone who sounds like they belong on CKLW." and being the 27-year-old brash character that I was, I would never do this now. At about 3 minutes before 9, on my first show on the Big 8, I called this individual and I said, "Hi there." He said, "Hi, can I help you?" And I said, "Yes, remember when you fired me, you said you wanted somebody that sounded like they belonged on CKLW." He said, "Yes." And I said, "Well, turn on your radio in 3 minutes to CKLW." So I tell that in the spirit of the moment. And if this person hears that, I hope you have a good laugh. But I would never do that now. So.
Well, now you would have done it on the air. That would have been even more. Wow, that's great, Scott. Yeah. I had no idea. Yeah. And then after CKLW, where did you go?
I will tell you something interesting. Don't forget to ask me that question again. In 1969, I believe it was, I was in Las Vegas. I believe it was an R&R convention. And Paul Drew and I were together. We were driving in his car. And we were listening to KHJ. And he said, "What do you think?" And I said, "If this ever comes to Detroit, Keener is over."
Mm.
Yeah, because you could hear it was a great, the Drake format was great. So I'm sorry, what was your question, Michael?
My question was, after CK, where did you go? Did you go to New York?
After CK, there were a couple of things, but the most important ones were I became the radio chairman for St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, and I did radiothons at various markets around the country. And then I worked at WDRQ a couple of times. And then I did local record promotion in Detroit. And then I did regional promotion. And then I did national record promotion for Atlantic Atco in New York for about 7 years. And then I did independent marketing and advertising. And then I taught for 15 years Eastern spiritual psychology and philosophy at Integral Yoga Institute in New York, and skipping over a few things, most recently, I taught at Rollins College, which is a private university in the Orlando area where I live, and I think
God
that's
bless
it.
you, man. You've had a great career.
Yeah, I had a
bless
great career and a great time, and
Basically,
appreciate.
after CKLW, you had a short stint at DRQ, probably with China Jones, I'm guessing. Yeah.
No, actually, with Jerry Clifton and Steve Rivers,
Oh.
and it was interesting at WDRQ because they fired me twice and hired me 3 times. And
That's what I love about radio. And I said this when
Yeah.
we did the Dick Burton documentary, which won an Emmy. You're welcome. And I said, my whole segment was I was sitting there with a very long receipt, like the receipts that you get from CVS.
Your dog looks like you're signaling something to him. He's looking up every time you move your paw.
Well, he loves me. But anyway, I was sitting there with this long receipt from CVS, and I said, "Here, the whole thing about Burton is he can't keep a job. You know, CKLW, WKNR, WXYZ, WOMG, W."
Yeah.
But that's typical the radio business for most people, right?
Yeah.
And that's, so.
Yeah.
Scotty,
Great,
thank you so much, man.
Great. He's a great radio talent, Dick Burton. And
Yes,
he and
he
I
is.
came to WKNR at the same time,
Yep.
and we even stayed at the same motel, getting ready to do our work at Keener.
Awesome.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
Dick's a great talent. We've had many great shows with him, and like I said, we did that documentary all about him. So I'm very proud of that. Okay, now on to the news department at CKLW. CKLW was not only infamous for great Drake rock and roll, the great format, but the news, 2020 news, which is often parodied, was spectacular in its style, rapid fire delivery.
It's 20 minutes before the hour. This is Byron McGregor, CKLW 2020 News for First Federal Savings of Detroit. Windsor police aren't saying much, but the Big 8 has learned that a 44-year-old woman was stabbed to death in her apartment at 3363 Tecumseh Road early this morning. It's not known if authorities have arrested any suspects, and so far no motive has been established. Her body was found shortly after 5 o'clock, and the still unidentified victim was dead on arrival at hospital. First reports of that incident were recorded on the hotlines, and the caller now becomes eligible for the weekly cash presentation or possibly $1,000 for the best tip of the year. The numbers to remember when you see news are 254 CKLW in Windsor, 961 NEWS in Detroit.
We have 2 of those great 2020 newscasters with us today, and I'd like to start with Randall Carlisle. Randall Carlisle, thank you for joining us. And
Thank you for inviting me.
Let's talk about 2020 news and your remembrances of those unbelievable newscasts.
I think you'd have to say it was unique, and that's a fair statement. I was working at a radio station in Akron, Ohio. It was a Friday, and I was news director. We had some major car accidents somewhere in northeastern Ohio. And enough people were dead that it intrigued Byron MacGregor at the Big 8. And he called me to do a voicer for them. Well, I was working at a station that, even though they played top 40, we didn't do news like the Big 8 did. And I said, let me write a story for you and call you right back. And so I wrote it in, because I grew up listening to the Big 8 and thought that would be the highlight of my career if I ever got there. And so I sent it, I rewrote it in Big 8 style, 2020 news style, and called them back up, did a voicer. And later that afternoon, Byron called me. This was on a Friday. And he said, I want you to fly up Saturday and interview for a job. And I did. And I remember Byron decided right then he was going to hire me. And our station was on Riverside Drive at the time. And I grew up in a small town in Ohio, and he took me to the roof of the studio in Windsor, and he looked out over the Detroit skyline, and he said, "You're going to wake this city up every morning." And I, I was sort of scared out of my mind and couldn't believe it. But 2 weeks later, I started working at the Big 8.
It's 20 minutes before the hour. This is Randall Carlisle, CKLW 2020 News.
It was probably, in terms of radio days, because I went on to television, in terms of my radio career, it was the most exciting and somewhat scary part of my career. My first newscast was at 10:40 on a Sunday morning, and I'll never forget it because I was trying to write it in Big 8 style, and I thought I had done the best writing I had ever done, because Byron pounded into us that in addition to the fast-paced, intense style 2020 news, it was the writing of what we did. And so my lead line was, "The stench of young burning flesh rose over Port Huron this morning as baby-hungry flames ate alive 5 little boys."
Oh, God.
And when I got out of the booth, which was on the second floor at the station, the phone was ringing instantly, and Byron said something like, "There's a fine line we don't cross in 2020 news, and you just crossed it. And if you cross it one more time, you'll be fired." So I had to tone down my writing style a little. And I could never figure out what that fine line was, because a lot of the other people, Joe Donovan included, who was here, I think, I'm not sure if it was Joe's line, but he said something like, when a nun was attacked on the beach, it was like clobbered the crap out of a nun. And I don't know if you claim that one, Joe, or not.
Well, we're gonna get to Joe in a minute. But
anyway, I never figured out what that fine line was, but I stayed for 7 years in the early 70s at the Big 8 before I read an article in the paper once, even though we were paid good money for the Times and for being a radio news person. I read an article that said, and the headline was, "First 6-figure salary for a TV anchor," and it was for the legendary Bill Bonds, that he was making over $100,000 a year in the contract he signed. And I said, "I think I want to get into TV." So I fought very hard and got into television. My first job was in Colorado Springs, went to Dayton, went to Salt Lake City, went to Minneapolis, went to Dallas, and back to Salt Lake City for another 24 years as the main anchor.
Wow, I had no idea. That's phenomenal. But it all started with CK and with Byron MacGregor, God bless him, and we're going to get to that. We have JoJo Shutty MacGregor on the show today, and she'll be able to talk, and she may be able to explain what that fine line was. But regardless, you must have figured it out, because you were on the air at CKLW for that many years and doing a fine job. So,
and I've got to tell you, it was the most in my entire career. It was the most exciting, fun place to work at. People like Pat and Joe and JoJo, we all just had we were all like in our 20s and making very good money and having a ball. With a newsroom of a radio newsroom of over, I think it was over 20 people, and it was just an incredible place to work. And it's really one of the highlights. I'll share a quick story. We used to, when we were in the old station on Riverside Drive, the news people had to take the forecast down to the jocks on the first floor, and Steve Hunter was the jock on the air at the time, and I had never met him, and I walked in. And he was just, we're friends now, but I walked in and I was sort of in awe of people like Pat Holliday, and Big Jim was not there when I was there, but I was in awe of all these guys. And I took the forecast in, and he turned around and yelled and said, "Get the hell out of my studio. I'm Steve Hunter. I'm a Big 8 jock, and don't interrupt me again." And it was like, oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Hunter, went back upstairs, but
Well, I you know what? You just reminded me that Steve Hunter was invited to be on this show today, and he's not here. So he may be watching this ultimately.
hi, Steve.
But I invited Steve Hunter to be here, and he could have defended himself. So I don't know what happened. But nonetheless, Randall Carlisle, thank you so much for your contributions and for your legendary career. I mean, the writing and the style of 2020 News is so unique, so spectacular, and we'll never forget. I don't know. There was one line that stuck with me for years: a tisket, a tasket, a dead baby in a basket. I mean, you can't do that on the radio today.
I mean, that style today would just be, I mean, we'd be driven out of town.
Absolutely. It was perfect in the 60s, though. Thank you, Randall. On to Joe Donovan, another legendary voice in Detroit, from CKLW to WWJ. Joe Donovan, welcome to the Franklin Show. And can you explain that fine line that Randall was talking about that Byron had set for everybody?
First of all, I plead innocent to having nuns getting the crap cleaned up. I will, however, confess to bodies, 3 bags full, when unfortunately a young runaway was dismembered and stuffed into, indeed, 3 trash bags in the bathtub of a seedy cast corridor hotel. She had picked the wrong guy to run away to Detroit to get away from her mom and dad, and that's what it turned out to be. He dismembered her and then fled. The clerk at the desk called our news tip line. We had a news tip line. We only gave like a crummy $5 or $10 a week, but $1,000 for the best tip of the year. So we always got people calling us. He called up and said, "I knew something was wrong when I opened the door and saw the girl's head on the mantle. And then I looked in the bathroom and I saw those 3 plastic garbage bags, and I knew a terrible event had occurred." But the fine line, I think it changed from every newscast. So you had to sort of know what to do and what not to do. And sometimes, as Randall explained, what not to do came out first. But I think that you could probably get away with it again with the internet now being what it is. You just wouldn't be able to find any sponsors for it. I got on to CKLW because I was too dumb. I was in Milwaukee. I'd gotten out of the record spinning part of it and gotten into news. And we were sort of an imitation CKLW station. And of course, like so many of the others, I just worshiped that station even before it was the Big 8 back in my hometown of Wheeling, West Virginia. I had listened to it for years, and that was my idea of the great big time radio. So one day, too dumb to know that you don't cold call Paul Drew, I cold called Paul Drew looking for a job. I was too dumb to know that if you cold called Paul Drew, he would take your call. So I called him, and he took my call. And I explained who I was, and wouldn't you know it, he had an opening for a newsman. A couple days later, I got a message after sending my tape. Call Byron MacGregor at this number. Flew into Detroit. Within a couple of weeks later, July of 1970, I was on the air at the Big 8. That thrill, whenever I'm feeling a little blue, I will go back and try to reconstruct in my mind what it felt like at 21 years old to be at that station, at that time, in that place. We were the 3rd most listened to radio station in North America and number 1 outside of the play. So from the Hudson River to the San Andreas Fault, we had the biggest audience around. And here are all these young guys just cavorting and having a blast. And of all the artifacts that I wish I would have saved, there's one from my days at the Big 8, was a postcard. This is a real story. It was a postcard from Erie, Pennsylvania, from a girl, looked like a girl's handwriting. I'm like 12 years old. And when the news comes on at our station here in Erie, we turn the radio down. when your news comes on, we turn it up louder. And she added, my favorite stories tell about someone going per. She spelled it with per with a gun. So please make sure that every time you have that kind of story, to make sure that you use it, because those are my favorite. And berserk was one of our favorite lines. He went berserk. That was a standard way of describing someone. In fact,
well, creating entertaining news, especially because it was so violent and so in your face. I mean, that was just so unique and interesting. I don't know that anybody could do it the way you guys did it.
Well, there was, as Randall, touched on, there was a way to do it that made the audience feel kind of like bad. You went over that line, and it was an instinctive thing. And I think part of it was you made fun of the victims. Instead of the perpetrators or the fools, you had to create a sympathy, as bloodthirsty and as off the wall as it might be, for that people. And I spent 36 years, all news all the time, WWJ, when Byron and I went over there to start the format there. And I don't know how often I used 2020 news techniques on an all news station. But of course, it was toned down in terms of not doing the this just in, it's the most murderous thing until the next terrible thing you hear. So turn this up. But just the idea of being able to portray things in a sort of radio technicolor.
No, you guys were absolutely spectacular at what you did. And you had, as you just reminded everyone, an illustrious and lengthy career following that at WWJ, where you were the voice of Detroit news for decades, but obviously in a much more sophisticated and informational approach. But no one will ever forget your work on 2020 News and CKLW. Thank you, Joe. Now, one of my favorite all-time people in the entire world is here. And God bless you, Joe Shutty MacGregor, wife of Byron MacGregor. And I say hyphen because you remind me there's a hyphen in between Joe. Joe, my question is, why also isn't there a hyphen between Shutty and MacGregor?
There is.
Oh, is there? Okay. Well,
I didn't hyphenate my first name, and I didn't hyphenate my last name. That's my real name. That's
I know.
No, it's my legal name. I was baptized JoJo, and people think it's a nickname. And there are millions of kids out there named Randall and Joe and JoJo and Byron and all these names that were on the air during the heyday of CKLW. But in all seriousness, I was the second of two daughters. My dad was Joe Shutty, and so my parents had Sharon, my sister, and then I came along and they thought for sure I was the boy. And no, it didn't happen, but I wasn't going to be Joe Jr. It would just get shortened down to Joe. And as it turned out, they said, well, my mother said, let's just hyphenate it and do Joe. And so the Catholic priest bought that when I was baptized, and that's what it is legally. Now, hyphenating Shutty and MacGregor, I can blame that on WJBK TV 2 in Detroit at the time, because they wanted to capitalize on not only who I was to start out with, but also Byron. And there was Farrah Fawcett Majors at that time and all of that. But that was the first question that Byron asked me when he hired me. I'm going to drift to that so I was tied to Byron. But the first question he asked me when I got into the news in his office, and I sat down and he said, so what's your real name? And so I told him the story. And I should have asked him what his real name was, because not everybody knows that Byron MacGregor was Gary Lachlan Mack. Now, that was a stickler for his dad, who was a proud broadcaster back in Calgary. He hosted Toast and Marmalade on CFAC radio. And Byron's got a younger brother, Hudson Mack, who's out in Victoria, British Columbia, also a newsman, news director. Then there's me, and then there's my sister. But the big deal was he picked when Paul Drew said to him, well, there's Billy Mack on the air and there's a Gary Mitchell. You cannot use either of your names on the air. So without asking anybody, Byron said, I think I'll take my uncle's name on my mother's side. And that didn't go over really big with his dad, of course, proud of the Mac name. And so he became Byron MacGregor, and the real Byron MacGregor was his mom's brother, and he was working at an advertising agency in Detroit, and they thought he was moonlighting at CKLW in the hours that Byron was on the air. So they finally got it straight, but that's who I met, and I never called him Gary. His mom and dad and brother and sister all called him Gary, and I was talking about Byron the whole time. So I actually married two guys too.
Well, your relationship as the spouse of that legend is well known. We love you and appreciate you. We know Byron was recently inducted into the Radio Hall of Fame, and that was a big event. We shared that together. And of course, Byron was responsible for the great recording The Americans, which was on the Billboard charts for years and is continued to be a noteworthy accomplishment.
The United States dollar took another pounding on German, French, and British exchanges this morning, hitting the lowest point ever known in West Germany. It has declined there by 41% since 1971, and this Canadian thinks it's time to speak up for the Americans as the most generous and possibly the least appreciated people in all the earth. As long as 60 years ago, when I first started to read newspapers, I read of floods on the Yellow River and the Yangtze. Who rushed in with men and money to help? The Americans did. They have helped control floods on the Nile, the Amazon, the Ganges, and the Niger. Today, the rich bottomland of the Mississippi is underwater, and no foreign land has sent a dollar to help. Germany, Japan, and to a lesser extent, Britain and Italy were lifted out of the debris of war by the Americans, who poured in billions of dollars and forgave other billions in debts. None of those countries is today paying even the interest on its remaining debts to the United States.
And of course, he also drifted from CKLW to television. He was anchor on Channel 50's 10 o'clock news. Yeah.
But he and Joe and Grant Hudson and Don Patrick, they all created the all news radio format for, as we all want to say, a more serious job. And that was because it was a CBS all news station. So when you think about so now before we go into the Americans, I really am his defender. In terms of 2020 news, as are Randall and Keith and Grant in his grave, and Joe Donovan and everyone else, Keith Radford. But the deal was this: when Byron got there, they were making that change to the Big Eight. It was Rosalie, it was Paul Drew, it was the Drake format. It was now the Big Eight. So he had the revolutionary idea and very wise idea to start doing the news in the style of the radio station. So that's why I'm going to defend it, because I will now be defending it until I leave this planet, because Byron was the first to stand up and say it was a sign of the times. It was always legitimate as far as checking on the news story. Ike McKinnon was the police chief in Detroit through part of that heyday of CKLW. And he said, my guys were told that when somebody called from CKLW, it was the real deal. Talk to them, get the story to them. He also admitted that since CKLW and the news department had a tip line, a news tip line, of course, that's how they got such great stories. He said sometimes the police would call into CKLW with the tip before checking on things. But no, it was very serious in terms of the content, but they just added the tune in factor as opposed to the tune out factor.
The flourishes, the pizzazz, the sparkle, the energy, the alliteration,
the writing. As Randall said, and Joe will attest to right here and now, yes, the writing was critical because that's what painted the picture. And when Byron veered off into all news radio, he couldn't quite do that, but he also had a stint at WCSX with JJ and the Morning Crew and Dick the Bruiser, and he was able to go back to painting those pictures. He just didn't talk about Soul Man Young sitting in a chair. He called it a big black leather chair. So the pictures and the people that were listening at CK, they were listening to that music. They were the baby boomers, and they're the ones that are now still crying for anything they can find or hear about CKLW, because it was the soundtrack of their lives, along with the music, as we're going to probably talk about Rosalie too, because you can't talk about anyone. Oh, and by the way, the news was at 20 before the hour and 20 after. So when most stations even tried to do the news, they would do it at the top of the hour. And keep in mind, it was an 8-minute news block. The news, sports with Joe Donovan, he even did sports and news. And then there was the weather, and there was my traffic report. So it was encapsulated into a short period of time, and people didn't know what hit them, but they remembered it, and they remember it to this day.
Were you in a helicopter back then, or did that come afterwards on Channel 2?
No, Byron hired me at CK, and it was 1974, just before Labor Day. Gary Burbank had marched into town, the Morning Mouth, the summer of 74, and Byron had another revolutionary idea. I'm going to do a traffic watch. So he mentioned it to I guess Herb McCord first, but then they had to talk to the powers that be in Toronto, the owners of the station, and they said, well, there's no traffic in Windsor. And then, the whole decision was made because of the power of the station, 50,000 watts, covered 28 states and 6 Canadian provinces. We were number 1 in Cleveland. They thought I should be doing traffic in Cleveland for them, but they listened anyway. But no, the fact of the matter was, Detroit was the Motor City, the automotive capital at the time. Second largest freeway system, second only to LA, and there was no traffic reporting being done, never mind from a helicopter. So that's what Byron decided to do. And and Ed Budabaugh, we're going to mention all kinds of people, but let's never, ever forget Eddie Budabaugh, chief engineer. His sideline was a consultant to NASA. He actually got the helicopter up, but got it to sound right. More importantly, he got CKLW to be the only radio station to be able to be heard in the Detroit-Windsor tunnel. So just an incredible guy. And think about so many things about the station. The first that they did, it's incredible. And that's why we talk about CKLW, the Big 8, to this day. And music's going to be a whole nother thing that we should at least cover to go back to the jocks. But I can remember going from the Detroit Auto Show, where Byron and I were doing a car show. Well, I guess we did the announcing for that every night of the auto show. But one night, CKLW was going to broadcast live the concert of Bob Seger and it was just incredible because they were there. They did the entire concert, and Ed Budabaugh was, and Bob Lusk, of course, and all these other people that were our engineers, chief engineers, were most important, of course. But just things like that, and all of the concerts that. And all the people who would put EJ, the DJ, or Elton John on the air to do an afternoon shift. Who would put Alice Cooper on with Ted the Bear Richards, for Halloween Eve? I mean, it's just, and those are the ones that just jump out.
I should mention Ted Richards was invited to be here. He kindly sent us a note saying that as much as he would love to, he's retired and doesn't want to do interviews anymore. So Ted the Bear Richards, God bless you, man. You are thought of fondly by all of us, and so thank you for that. But
we did traffic for the Detroit Lions game at the Pontiac Silverdome. That was new. Nobody was doing that. For the rock concert, the Who were performing at the Pontiac Silverdome at the time. That was the big place to be seen and heard and to have concerts. But in the promotion, we can go on and on about promotion and marketing, and I'm going to go back to the Americans, but that has to do with music. And when you think about what the sponsors had to do to keep that helicopter flying for 4 hours in the morning and 2.5 in the afternoon, It was a split shift, but it was definitely a memorable ride. And yeah, we had some close calls.
Yep.
I prefer to leave those aside for right now.
So I want to move on very quickly because we're almost at the 52 mark here.
Oh.
This is an hour special. We could do a whole nother hour just with you, but let's talk about Byron. Let's talk about the Americans, and then we're going to have to wrap it up. So go ahead, Jojo. Let's talk about Byron and the Americans.
Well, at one point, he read the editorial that was written by Gordon Sinclair, who was kind of a curmudgeonly guy, and he was a Toronto newspaper editorial writer, kind of cantankerous, whatever words you want to use to describe him. But he wrote the editorial that was called, it wasn't called anything, as a matter of fact. It didn't have a name. It was just his opinion. And it was strong. And Byron, at that point, believed very strongly in it, obviously, because I was told from day one, he cut that out of the Toronto Star and put that editorial in his desk drawer. And one day, Keith Radford, who was in charge of doing Canada Now, a public service program, a half-hour public service program, came running into Byron and said, "Hey, I did this interview, and the show is going to be about 4 minutes short. Can you help me out here?" And Byron said, "Yeah." So he reached into his drawer, pulled that out, and decided to read that. Keith, on the other hand, went and got A Bridge Over Troubled Water. And Byron read it on the air as part of that public affairs program. It ran in the middle of the night, and they got such response, it blew out the switchboards. And Byron got a call in the middle of the night and said, we just have to play that record again that you did. And Byron is saying, "Hey, no, it's just part of a public affairs program. Just go ahead and run that half-hour show again." Now, the second time it ran on a Saturday morning, Armin Baladian, the owner at Westbound Records in Detroit, heard it, came marching over to the station. The following Monday, he met with Herb McCord and Byron, and he said, "We've got to record this." And Byron said, "Hey, man, I'm not a recording artist. I'm a newsman." And Armin politely said, "But you don't realize what you just read here on the air." Long story short, hit the top of the charts, probably within, it was the fastest selling spoken word record, first of all, to, I think it was February of 1974. He actually put it on here late 1973. I did not know him at the time. I actually heard it one time, but there was, in addition to promotion for the station, now you've got the Americans that just took everything over the top. Of course, it broke on CKLW. And Rosalie Trombley was playing it. They were playing it all over the country. It was that big a hit. And I just, I wasn't there for it, but after I met him, I should have said to him two things. "I know who you are. You're not really Byron MacGregor, you're Gary Mack." But 3.5 million copies that first round, and Byron donated all the proceeds to the American Red Cross.
Wow. Great story. Great guy.
And it continues to this day.
Yeah.
I mean, even when he was inducted into the Radio Hall of Fame, it came back to haunt all of us, that record did, after the Iran hostage situation, after 9/11. And as the guy was introducing Byron, he said, "I have a feeling we might just need to be playing this." This was last September. He said, "and re-releasing it again." But anytime there's bad times and you want to feel good, the Americans will do the trick.
Yeah, it likely will be re-released again, especially after all the publicity it gets from this show, which is the #1 show on cable. But anyway, I want to wrap this up by saying how much I appreciate all of you and how much I appreciate our nostalgia, our friendship, our radio reunions that we've done over the years. They are so meaningful to me and to so many people. CKLW is a legendary radio station. There is still a CKLW.com. You can go there and listen to a version of CKLW. Charlie O'Brien is responsible for that. He was invited to be here. He was unable, but there's another place for you to go and listen to.
And the Facebook page too.
And there's a CKLW tribute page. This broadcast will be there probably in the next day or so.
Hey, can we all sing the jingle before we
Well, I'll give you a countdown if you guys want to try this.
We doing fast to slow, slow to fast, or fast to fast?
All right, I'm going to count it down. 5, 4, 3.
Hey, Michael.
Yes, sir.
Hey, Michael.
Yes, sir.
Let me do it the right way here. Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to the greatest hits of all time on the $1 Million Weekend. All weekend from
CKLW. Motor City.
Well, it was pretty good.
Pretty good.
Next time we'll have a rehearsal.
We'll practice.
I did an open and a close to this show. It is a tribute show to the extent that you can do a tribute show to the many fine people of CKLW who are no longer with us. Rosalie tops that list. Johnny Williams, brother Bill Gable, we just lost him. Robin Seymour. Who am I missing?
You know what?
Tommy Shannon.
Something you could mention is some of the board ops: Bob Lusk, Greg Halleck, Colin Kennedy, Larry. I can't think of who else. Yeah.
Well, yeah, Bob Lusk is going to be seen on this program in a clip. Is he's still with us? Is he not?
Yes.
Okay. I was talking about the people who have passed away.
Yeah.
I misspelled his name with my voicer, Bob Lust, Lust. So I
All right, you guys, thank you so much.
Wait. Today's Byron's birthday.
God bless.
Oh.
What a
wow.
How coincidental is this, right?
Please, no more singing.
Oh. All right, well, happy birthday to Byron up there, and thanks to all of you for being here today on the Franklin Show. You'll be seeing this within the next day or so all over the world, and God bless you all. Thanks for being here.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye.
All right, folks, stand by. We will wrap this up shortly, and thank you for being here on the Franklin Show.
Has your kind of music.
In the old days, jingles could run anywhere from 30 seconds to a minute long. The Drake jingles were rarely longer than 3 seconds, and each one served a special purpose, to keep things moving.
It was Fast to Fast, More Music, CKLW.
More music, CKLW.
It was Fast to Slow, More Music, CKLW, sung in a nice slow ballad.
More music, CKLW.
There was a Slow to Fast, a very pretty melodic singing of music, and then a big powerful CKLW to take you into things like the Who's Won't Get Fooled Again and stuff like that. Prettiest radio jingle ever sung was the Big 8 ballad, played up against things like Gladys Knight's It Should Have Been Me or something. It'll bring a tear to your eye.
Thank you so much to my great guests in this phenomenal tribute to CKLW Radio. And for those that we've lost, I want to pay special tribute to Brother Bill Gable, to Robin Seymour, to Byron MacGregor, to Johnny Williams. God bless all of you and all that we've lost, the big CKLW pioneers in radio in the 60s. Hope you'll join us again next time on The Franklin Show. Thanks, everybody.